In 1977, I graduated from the Evergreen State College in Olympia. I know we've got at least one other graduate from Evergreen here. Evergreen is well known for its alternative vision of education. And one quarter when I was there, I studied the philosophers Plato and Aristotle. That's all I did the whole quarter was study Plato and Aristotle. I had an individual contract with a professor, and we met for 1 hour every week. We would meet together, and he would give me an assignment for the next week. He would give me a primary reading from Plato or Aristotle, and then he would give me several modern commentaries on the text. And my assignment was to write a 5-page paper, and I was supposed to outline what the argument of the philosopher was, and then I was supposed to say whether I thought it was right or wrong. So every Wednesday, I would show up at his office at 1 o'clock, and I would read the paper to him out loud. He would sit there like this with his eyes closed. And then he would have about 3 minutes of silence, and he would take a black marker and a piece of paper, and he would go over everything I said, and he would take it apart piece by piece. And at the end of the quarter, he gave me my student evaluation. At Evergreen, there are no grades, but the professor will give the student an evaluation. And what he said was, Bill has learned to understand the arguments of the great philosophers, and he's just beginning to learn what he thinks about them. In other words, I was a raw beginner. In our gospel lesson today, Jesus asked the disciples 2 questions. The first question is, who do people say that I am? That's not too hard to answer. They say, well, some people say you're John the Baptist, some people say you're Elijah, some people say you're one of the prophets. They're basically just reporting on what they've heard. It's secondhand knowledge. That's not so hard. Then he asks them a second question. And this question is, who do you say I am? And this is a much more difficult question to answer. Because in order to answer this question, you're going to have to dig down deep. And you're going to have to think it through for yourself. And you're going to have to come up with an answer that you can defend, at least tentatively. And the disciples think about that. And Peter blurts out, you are the Messiah. And Jesus says, keep it quiet for now. Well, a good teacher uses questions to teach the students. That's what Socrates' method was, to ask questions. And if you give your students all the answers at the beginning, then all they're going to do is just memorize them and regurgitate the answer to you, and then they'll forget about it. But if you just ask the question and make them work on the question, then that's when the learning starts, when they start opening their mind and trying to understand what the question is really about and what the answer is. So by asking these 2 questions, Jesus is being a good teacher. He's using good teaching technique. Who is Jesus? That's the big question in the Gospel of Mark, and it's the big question for every Christian. Being a Christian means to wrestle with that question. Who is Jesus? I need to get a drink of water. Excuse me. You got a cough drop? Yeah. Unusual. Yeah. Most of us were told by our parents, our Sunday school teachers, or our preachers who Jesus is. But The work of a Christian is to come up with our own answer, the one we have come up with ourselves, to work through that question, who do you say I am? People sometimes ask me how I came to be a priest. And I tell them the short answer is God called me. But the long answer is more difficult. When I was first married, and Katie and I had 2 little boys, I did not know how to be a husband. And I did not know how to be a father. And I felt like I needed something more. So I wanted to go to church. Well, I was raised Methodist, but there was no Methodist church in our little tiny Alaska town. Katie had been raised as an Episcopalian, and she knew the lady Episcopal priest in town, and so we started going to the Episcopal church. We got married there. Our 2 boys were baptized there, and it became our church. It was just a little tiny church. Thank you. It was just a little tiny church, maybe 15 or 20 people on a Sunday morning, and it was basically one room. The altar was kept behind a niche in the wall, and on Sunday morning we would open the niche and bring out the altar and have communion, and afterwards we'd put it back into the niche and we'd bring out the tables and we'd have coffee hour. That's how small the church was. And we started going there, and I looked at this Book of Common Prayer, and I thought, how quaint. These people read their prayers out of a book. But, after we'd been there a while, I started to get to appreciate the Book of Common Prayer. I liked the language and the structure and the beauty of it. And it sort of became my book. And the people in that church welcomed us into their church family. We became a part of that church family. I got more and more involved. Our priest left, and so I became the chair of the search committee. And when we called our new priest, he and his wife had 2 boys, near the age of our 2 boys, and so our families became good friends, and we did a lot of things together. One Sunday, we'd had communion, and we were waiting for the priest to put away the things on the altar, and we were standing there, and I had this sense that Jesus was standing right next to me. I mean, it was as real as if you were standing next to me. And he said to me, "Come with me." And that was the moment when Jesus became real to me. He wasn't just a figure in history or someone I'd read about in a book, but he was real, and he was alive, and he was present. Who do you say I am? Well, for me at that moment, he was real and present and alive. Well, I didn't tell a lot of people about this, but people started saying to me, you ought to become a priest. Have you ever thought about becoming a minister? I said, no. You have to be called to be a priest. And that summer, I went home to see my mother in Colorado, and on the way back, I was on the plane, and I got to thinking about it. I thought, well, maybe they're right. I should look into it. So when I got home, I started looking into it, and the doors started to open. And by the next summer, we had quit our jobs, sold the house and the car and the truck and the boats, and we were on our way to seminary. So that is how I became a priest. We got to seminary, and it didn't turn out exactly like I thought. First of all, there was this huge culture shock. Tennessee is not Alaska. In Alaska, our church was small and personal and informal. But in Tennessee, the church is big and formal and traditional, and it has this very strong sense of history. And it felt like a completely different church to me. And I got to seminary, and the other seminarians seemed so sophisticated. There were stockbrokers and lawyers who were going for a second career, and I was just a boat carpenter. And we lived in this little duplex that was so tiny and cramped, and the temperature was over 100 degrees, and it was 100% humidity, and we just were dying. We thought we had come to the wrong place, and I began to think, I have made a big mistake. My professors in seminary treated the Bible like it was just any other book, talked about the authors of the Bible and the history of the Bible and its literary composition. It was like they were taking all the magic out of it. So seminary was not easy to start. But, over time, we adjusted. And after we'd been there 3 years, we came to appreciate gracious Southern hospitality. We came to love that seminary and the community of people that were in the seminary. I got together with 3 other friends our second year, and we formed a prayer group. Every week we would meet to pray together, and that's where I learned to pray. And by the time I graduated, I'd come to appreciate the seminary and the Episcopal Church. Well, in seminary, they taught us how to preach. They told us what a sermon is, and they told us how to construct a sermon and how to deliver a sermon. And when I first started preaching, I was very concerned that I was going to be correct about my sermons. I did not want to preach heresy. And so I preached what I thought I was supposed to preach, what I was supposed to say. But I hadn't found my voice yet. I was really telling people what other people were saying about Jesus, and I hadn't been able yet to say what I think about Jesus. And that's really the work of preaching, and it's the work of a Christian. I've been a priest for 26 years. That's probably 1,200 or 1,300 sermons when you preach every Sunday. Some of you have been here for a number of years, and you've probably heard hundreds and hundreds of my sermons, and you still keep coming back. I'm thankful for that. So over the years, I've tried to bring my own voice to my sermons. I've tried to become more authentic and speak about what I think and not just what I think I'm supposed to say. It's been a long journey for me. It's been hard for me to be able to do that, but I think I've come a long ways. Who do people say I am? And who do you say I am? Those are the questions that Jesus has given us. We are supposed to work through them with study and prayer and conversation and worship so that we can learn more and more who Jesus is. We keep the question in front of us. Every Wednesday night since I've been here, we've had a Wednesday night program, except for in the summers. And I've learned a lot in those sessions. We've studied the latest thinkers in progressive theology. We've opened up our minds to new ways of thinking about God and new ways to thinking about the church. And that's helped me a lot. I've grown as a Christian and as a person of faith because of that. The poet Rainer Rilke wrote to a friend. He said, "Be patient with all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves." In other words, sometimes the questions are more important than the answers. So thank you for listening to me all these years as I worked through the questions of the Christian faith. Amen.
Amen.